Dennis, I feel badly for you since it's 2 hours behind. You got 2 hours more fast to do than we do. Everybody's muted as soon as they come in, so.
I said another 2 hours. What's the difference, Rabbi?
Yeah.
For you, I'll do anything. Right? You can always get me this compensation, right? No?
For an extra 2 hours of fast, you get extra brownie points. Haha.
Okay.
Well, look at this. Okay, I have to do something. So folks, since we have so many people, just having an open conversation is not really going to work for the study session. So you'll see, I'm going to mute everybody. And just to ensure that there's no distracting noises or whatnot. But let me finish admitting people to the session. So Gemar Tov, everyone. I hope everyone's, one more person.
Rabbi, you want to make me co-host so I can help you out or no?
Okay. I won't say no to that. Thank you, Dennis. Okay. So this is what I'd like to do. There are 30 participants in this Zoom session, which is very nice. Again, here come 2 more. So because of the size, we're not going to, it's not going to, we can't really have a conversation, like leave everybody unmuted. That really won't work too well, and there are more people coming in. What I have done is enabled the chat. So if you go down on the bottom of your screen to the word chat and just click on that, a sidebar will open next to all the faces. And then at the very bottom of it, it says to everyone in blue, and type message here. So in case you're not familiar with how to type something into chat, then either to everyone, or if you see there's a little arrow next to the word everyone inside the blue, you can chat to one particular person. So either you can find me or just leave it to everyone. And if you have a question or a comment, type it in the chat, because I just don't think it'll work so well with nearly 40 people who are on the Zoom session to just unmute yourself and ask a question. So though that's the way I like to do it in person, I just think that this would be a little bit more effective. So whenever we have a study session on Zoom or in person, I like to do the blessing for Torah study. And I'm laughing, Bill, because we have one question already before I've even started. So first, the blessing for Torah study, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, who has commanded us to study the words of Torah. So the Haftarah that is designated for Yom Kippur afternoon is the 4-chapter book of Jonah. Jonah is one of 12 so-called minor prophets. There you go. So Josh Lansky and his son Jonah are saying to everyone, in case you're on a tablet and not on a laptop or a computer, you can find the chat another way there, okay? Jonah, the book of Jonah, is one of 12 so-called minor prophets in the Bible. Minor prophets in that it is determined by the size of the book. So Jonah, being only 4 chapters, makes him into a so-called minor prophet. So it's not about this, the content of the book, but it's about the size of the book. So there is a prophet Obadiah, who's only 1 chapter, and there's Hosea, that is 12 chapters, or maybe it's 14 chapters, something like that. So as opposed to Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, that have over 40 chapters each, close to 60 chapters. Isaiah has 66 chapters. So that's why. The message that Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel convey is just as important as the message that the minor prophets convey. It's only in size. Why? But Bill asked the question, why is the book in minor prophets and not in writings? Well, the simple answer is because prophetic books are not part of the writings. So this gets to how the Jewish Bible is divided. So in English, the Jewish Bible is called the Bible. In Hebrew, the Bible is called by an abbreviation Tanakh. Tanakh. So Tanakh is 3 letters put together as a so-called word that is pronounced Tanakh, but it's an abbreviation for 3 words: Torah, 5 books of Moses; Nevi'im, prophets; and Ketuvim, writings. Okay, so the prophet section of the Bible is not only prophets. There are historical books that are part of the prophets. You have the book of Judges, you have the book of Samuel, the 2 books of Samuel, and the 2 books of Kings. Those are history books that if you just read Judges, Samuel, and Kings, you would have the history of the people of Israel from entering the land of Israel until the exile to Babylonia in the 6th century, in the 6th century BCE. So that's all the history. But then the prophets that we meet, starting with Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel, the 3 of them, Jeremiah witnessed the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. Ezekiel was in Babylonia with the Israelites there. The other prophets, also the 12 minor prophets, are from different periods of that Israelite history. The writings usually are what we associate with the writings is the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, the book of Job, very big books that talk about more values and lessons, that religious lessons that we're supposed to learn, as opposed to history. But there's history there too. At the end, the 2 books of Chronicles, Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah are history books, narrative books too. So they don't all fall into clear-cut parameters, but there are no prophets in the writings section. And Moses is called a prophet, but it's not the book of, it's the 5 books of Moses in English, but it's Torah in Hebrew. So it's not a prophetic book, the Torah. So I digress a little bit, but prophets are mainly prophets with some other history books. What I wanted to do with looking at the book of Jonah is you can open your Machzor to page 367, where we find it. And I want us to look at, I'm going to read in English and pause at places to allow you to ask questions in the chat to make some comments. So remember, the book of Jonah, 4 chapters, is a book unto itself. It's not based on any other book. It's not dependent upon anything that came before or anything that comes after. It's a unit unto itself. So keep that in mind as we start reading the book, saying what are we missing? The word of Adonai came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me. So if you were starting a book, is this how you would start writing a book? In other words, what's missing from the opening sentence of, or the opening 2 sentences of this book? What information do we need to understand what the book is talking about? Type in any thoughts to that. Think about books like Moby Dick starts, call me Ishmael. Okay, that starts with a name, but then there's a little bit more information that comes after that. What are we missing here from the book of Jonah? Yes, what led up to this? Time and place, exactly. So there's no time and place. We don't know what year. Some other prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of them start with, Isaiah technically in chapter 6, not in chapter 1, but gives a context. All of them give a context. These are the Lord spoke to so-and-so, son of so-and-so, who lived during the reign of King so-and-so. Or this prophecy came in the 5th year of the reign of so-and-so. Okay, we don't even know that this happened in the land of Israel. So the other prophets will say that the word of the Lord came to so-and-so who lived in such and such place in Israel. So we don't know who Jonah is. We don't know why God came to Jonah. The other prophets, the major prophets, have a story, a backstory of why the prophets were chosen, or if not how they were chosen, at least the process in which they were chosen. In other words, like in Ezekiel, a major revelation of God to Ezekiel in this unusual vision that Ezekiel has of a fiery chariot and God's heavenly throne. So we don't have that here. So we don't know if this is the first time God is speaking to Jonah or the 10th time that God is speaking to Jonah. We just don't know. We don't know where he lived. The only thing we know about Jonah, right, and we also, as Iris is saying, we don't know what evil is that Nineveh is doing that Jonah has to go. But before we get to sentence 2, just a little bit about Jonah. Jonah, son of Amittai, appears another place in the Bible, in the book of Kings. And just as in 2 Kings chapter 14, beginning with verse 23, in the 15th year of King Amaziah, son of Joash of Judah, King Yerovam, son of Joash of Israel, became king in Samaria for 41 years. So the land of Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom, which was known as Israel or Samaria, and the southern kingdom known as Judah. He did what was displeasing, that is, that King Amaziah did, to the Lord. He did not depart from all the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit. It was he who restored the territory of Israel from Lavo Hamat to the Sea of Arava, in accordance with the promise that the Lord, the God of Israel, had made through his servant, the prophet Jonah, son of Amittai, from Gat Hefer. And that's it. So all that the book of Kings adds is that somehow God had spoken to Jonah before here in the book of Jonah, and that Jonah is from the town of Gat Hefer or Hefer. Don't know where that town is in the land of Israel. Okay, so the backstory is missing. The usual why God chose the prophet is missing. The revelation of God to the prophet is missing. So all of that missing from the story. The story just starts right up with this event that we're going to be reading about. So go at once to Nineveh, and it assumes also that we know where Nineveh is or what Nineveh is. Okay, so in other words, if a prophet spoke to this Jonah, me, and said, go to Philadelphia, well, I know where Philadelphia is, and we all know where Philadelphia is, but it assumes that everybody knows where Nineveh is. Okay, so we do know from other sources where Nineveh is, but it's fascinating. It doesn't say Nineveh of Assyria, okay? Because Nineveh is the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. And we know that from other places in the Bible and in the book of Kings. So again, the book of Jonah assumes that we've read other books of the Bible to understand the context, okay? That we've read the book of Kings to have met Jonah, son of Amittai, before, and we're living in Israel knowing where Nineveh is and what it represents. The Assyrian Empire is not to be confused with Syria, but it's similar to that. In Hebrew, it's Ashur, as opposed to the country Syria today, which in Hebrew is Suria. Okay, so Suria in Hebrew is spelled with the letter Samach. Ashur for Assyria, which two S's, is with a shin. So it's not really the same thing, though it's partly the same territory. So it's northeast of Israel, where Damascus is, and beyond. So taking up the eastern portion of Turkey, the northern portion of Syria, and the northern portion of Iraq today is the Assyrian Empire from the time of the Bible. And Nineveh was the capital city. The Assyrian Empire is the one that came down to the land of Israel. If you could picture in your mind's eye the map of the Middle East, Israel being that bridge between Assyria and Asia and Africa. So it had a very important strategic place in the geography of the Middle East and the world at the time. So roving nations would come through and take the territory every now and then. So at this time in the Bible, Assyria is ascendant and Egypt is kind of waning in power. So Assyria comes down at one point and conquers the northern kingdom of Israel and sends into exile all the Israelites from the northern kingdom, and they're gone forever to history because Assyria forces the nations that it exiles to assimilate into the bigger culture. Whereas the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah, was exiled to Babylonia, and the Israelites were allowed to maintain their separate identity and live separately from everyone else. So it's really thanks to the Babylonians that we're alive today. Because if the Babylonians had the same policy that the Assyrians did, we would be gone to history. Okay, so some of the questions from Iris we'll get to in a little bit because we haven't even read up to Tarshish yet. And is Jonah similar to folk tales from other cultures in the area, or is it likely unique to Israel? What is unique about the story is the way the prophecy ends up turning out, if we will get there, because one thing about this is, though the So go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me. We don't know what their wickedness is. We know that if we were living in Israel at the time, they're the enemy. So it's, I'm reading right now Eric Larson's new, nonfiction, historical fiction, The Splendid and the Vile, about 1 year of Winston Churchill, the air barrage of London. So it talks about May 1940 to May 1941. So if we compare the wickedness of Nineveh, it's the Nazis. Okay, so anybody and what's interesting about the book, it goes back and forth sometimes to Goebbels and Goring and what they say in response to what Roosevelt and Churchill say. So of course, from our side of the conflict, the Nazis are the evil empire, but for Nazi Germany, the British and the Americans are the evil empire. So it all depends on perspective as who is evil and what their wickedness is. So clearly the book of Jonah is from Jewish perspective because it's in our Bible. So it's going to have our perspective on the non-Israelite world. So the wickedness of Nineveh has something to do with being anti-Israel. And we know that around this time that it purports to describe, the Assyrians are threatening Israel. Okay, so there's all this backstory that we had to fill in that the book did not provide for us. So the word of God came to Jonah, go to Nineveh. And what does Jonah do in verse 3? Jonah, however, started out to flee to Tarshish from Adonai's service. Vayakom Yonah livroach Tarshisha. So Vayakom, he got up. Usually when it's to get up, you're getting up to usually fulfill the mission that was just commanded of you. But he's getting up to flee. Leave roach is to flee to Tarshish, milifnei Adonai, literally from before God. So Jonah runs away. There are other prophets who argue with God. Why are you choosing me? I'm not up to the task. I really don't want to do it. So Moses argues with God at the burning bush. Why me? Don't choose me. I am kavad peh, kavad lashon. I'm heavy mouth and heavy tongue, which most scholars suggest he was a stutterer, or at least he just couldn't speak. He wasn't up to the task, Moses thought, and God has to convince him. The same is true of other prophets. I believe Jeremiah might have been the same way, not wanting to take on the task. So it's not unusual. It's not unusual for a prophet to argue. What is unusual is to run away. So Jonah doesn't say anything to God. He just runs away and goes to Tarshish. Now, where is Tarshish? That's Iris's question there. That's the last question in the chat. Where is Tarshish? That's a very good question. So there is this book. This is the JPS Bible Commentary. They have a series of this for the Torah, and then also a couple of other books of the Bible, usually the Five Scrolls and the Book of Jonah commentary. The person who edited this commentary is a Bible professor by the name of Uriel Simon. He taught at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. When I was there in Israel studying for my junior year at Hebrew University, junior year of college, and also for rabbinical school, people were saying, oh, you should take Uriel Simon's class on the Book of Jonah. So I never did, and I missed out. But we have this book. The book essentially is his lectures of the Book of Jonah, and the commentary in our Machzor is insights from that commentary edition. So he says that there are different opinions as to where Tarshish is. So he says Josephus, who's a Jewish historian from the time of Tisha B'Av, of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Romans, he identified Tarshish with Thrasos in Cilicia, which is a port city in southeastern Asia Minor, or southeastern Turkey, evidently on the basis of the phonetic resemblance of the biblical and Greek names. Thrasos, maybe the double S could be Thrashos, Tarshish, similar sounding. So maybe it's simply catching a boat to southeast Turkey. So again, if you're picturing in your mind's eye the map of Israel, going to southeastern Turkey is a journey by boat, but it's not so far, just up the Mediterranean. So in today's geography, you go up past Lebanon, past Syria, and then you get to Turkey. But usually, most people think that it is in southern Spain. It seems more plausible, Simone says, however, to identify it with the Phoenician colony of Tartessus, which seems to have been located in southern Spain, west of the Straits of Gibraltar, in a region rich in silver and other metals. Now, if you're going to southern Spain, Uriel Simone says, okay, there's, thank you to Howard for that link on where was Nineveh, etc. Okay. Okay, so I'm getting there. So Nineveh is northeast of Israel, above Iraq, or in Iraq today. And Tarshish is in Spain, totally the other direction, and it's the end of the known world. Tarshish, so he wants to get on a boat to go to the end of the world. Now, to go to Tarshish by boat, according to the commentary, might have taken a year to do so, because there were no such things as luxury liners or cruise ships at the time. If you're going to travel, there wasn't a sense of traveling for leisure in the time of the Bible or in ancient times. No such thing as taking a vacation. So going to Jaffa, he went down to Jaffa and found a ship going to Tarshish, right? So Jaffa was the port city. The purpose of the port was not to grab a boat or a ferry. It was for cargo. So think about it. If we go to, cities today have train stations. If they're on the coast, they have ports, and there are bus stations. So there are ways to travel from one place to the other, whether going on business or whether going for leisure. Traveling for leisure is a modern pursuit. It's not the time of the Bible. So if you're grabbing a boat, if you're hopping on a boat to Tarshish, you're hopping on a cargo ship. And a cargo ship is going to take a lot longer to get to your destination than a cruise ship. So the cargo ship is going to hit every single port in the Mediterranean from Jaffa. So Jaffa is the eastern end of the Mediterranean, right? It's Tel Aviv. It's right there, the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. And Spain is the other end of the Mediterranean Sea. But you're not going on a straight line. You're going up the coast. So the cargo ship would go up the coast of Israel to Phoenicia, or whatever that was called back then in the time of the Bible, to then Asia Minor, to then Greece, all around Greece, the whole peninsula of Greece, into the Adriatic and to Italy, and all around Italy, and then to France and to Spain. So I'm using today's geography. So it's the long way to get to southern Spain by way of all those port cities. So it's taking a local instead of an express, but the local would have taken a year. So that's how Jonah so much wanted to run away from God, to get into a boat that would go, that would take a year to get to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went aboard to sail with the others to Tarshish, away from the service of Adonai. Okay? Now, so this is our background to the story. So instead of telling us who Jonah is, his relationship to God until this point, what Nineveh is, where it is, anything like that, the key to the story is to make it unique among all the prophetic books is that Jonah ran away. And the key to this book is that there's no running away from God. Because verse 4 says, "But Adonai cast a mighty wind upon the sea, and such a great tempest came upon the sea that the ship was in danger of breaking up." Okay, so it's not unusual for a storm to brew in the Mediterranean. What may be unusual is understanding that the storm is coming from God. So here, the book, because it's in the Bible, clearly anything that happens is going to happen because God said so. So God cast a mighty wind upon the sea. A great tempest came upon the sea that the ship was in danger of breaking up. In their fright, the sailors cried out, each to his own God. So that's the natural reaction of sailors. Now, these are sailors, we assume, would know what to do and how to handle a ship in a storm. But this might have been such a mighty storm that they hadn't seen before, that they had no other recourse but to cry out to their gods. Okay? So it's not a regular storm that a sailor would know. Right. We don't know why Jonah wanted to run away, Josh, and that's a good question. Why did Jonah want to run away from God? We don't know. That's another question that's left here, but we'll get to that in a moment. I promise to answer that before we end the session at 4:00, because it gets to why we say this, why this book is chosen on Yom Kippur. So there's this great storm that the professional seamen don't know what to do, and they cry out to God, to their gods. And they flung the ship's cargo overboard to make it lighter for them. And that is, according to the commentary, a natural thing to do, to instead of weighing down the boat, which might prevent it from being able to maneuver more easily in a storm. They want to lighten the load so that the boat can be more maneuverable. So if imagine a cargo ship, though, picture in your mind's eye these cargo ships with all these containers on them, container ships. So it's kind of hard to maneuver a container ship. And if there's a huge storm coming, well, the crew risks losing some of those containers into the sea. And yes, the boat might be more maneuverable, but you're talking about a 500-foot long boat. It's kind of hard to maneuver that pretty easily. So, but flinging the cargo overboard to make it lighter for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the vessel where he lay down and fell asleep. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about the storm raging around him. And, obviously he's not seasick because he's able to go right to sleep. The storm is brewing. The sailors are crying out to their gods. And Jonah, who is a prophet, who could cry out to God, not to any God with a small g, but to God with a capital G, chooses not to do that. He is running away from God. He is not accepting the prophetic mantle that he has. And instead, he goes to sleep. So he wants to get away from God as far as possible. And he doesn't care about the weather outside, and that the crew are crying out to their gods. He just goes to sleep. The captain, page 368, the captain went over to him and cried out, "How can you be sleeping so soundly? Up, call upon your God." Hey, everybody else is calling out to their gods. You got to do it too. We need all the help we can. So, we don't need your help throwing cargo over the ship. We need your help praying to God. So that's fascinating also, right? That's the help that the captain of the ship wants. Everybody's praying. We need you to pray too. Perhaps the God will be kind to us and we will not perish. That's what they're praying for. Just ease the storm enough so that we don't die. The crew said to one another, "Let us cast lots and find out on whose account this misfortune has come upon us." So that's how desperate they are. They understand that this is some power mightier than they, taking over the ship and taking over the world around them. They've done everything they could as sailors, as professionals, to navigate the storm. It's not working. They're praying to their gods. It's not working. The storm is still raging. So the only thing they have left to do is to cast lots and see that the storm's gotta be because of somebody on this boat. Now, I wouldn't necessarily come to that conclusion, but clearly for the purpose of our story, it is. These pagan sailors, and I'm calling them pagans because the book does, because they're worshiping, they're praying to their gods with a small g. These pagans recognize that there's a force out there. Jonah recognizes it and doesn't want to do anything about it. In fact, he wants to run away from that force. The sailors recognize there is this force, and they're doing everything they can, and they're even going to be willing to sacrifice somebody to the god that to appease Mother Nature. They cast lots, and of course, that's my addition, the lot fell on Jonah. They said to him, tell us, you who have brought this misfortune upon us, what is your business? Where have you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" Right? So in other words, clearly the lot falls on Jonah. So the storm is happening because of Jonah. So such a storm that these sailors have never seen before in their professional history, recognize that there's some power out there that is angry at Jonah. So Jonah, they want to find out who this Jonah character is and what he did that is so terrible that it was able to garner all the forces of Mother Nature against this boat. What is your country? What people are you? And what does Jonah say? I am a Hebrew. I worship Adonai, the God of heaven, who made both sea and land. It's clearly, he doesn't answer all their questions. He doesn't say, only says, where have you come? What is your country? I'm a Hebrew. They didn't ask, what religion are you? He answered, I worship Adonai, the God of heaven, who made both sea and land. That's verse 9. Ivri Anochi, I am a Hebrew. Abraham used that term. Ve'et Adonai Elohei Hashamayim ani yareh. And God, the God of heaven, I fear. Okay, so the commentator points out that reference to God as the God of heaven is found in later in the Bible, and that this helps to place Jonah later in Israelite history because of how God is referred to here, that God isn't referred to this way in earlier books in the Bible. But who made both sea and land, right? Which is like opposites. And I've talked about this before with poetic descriptions. When you say opposites, sea and land, you mean everything. So instead of saying the God, I worship Adonai, the God of heaven, who made everything, who made the universe, he says made both sea and land, meaning everything. So the crew was greatly terrified, and they asked him, "What have you done?" And when the crew learned that he was fleeing from the service of Adonai, now the book doesn't tell us that Jonah said that he fled from Adonai. The book assumes through this literary device that when they learned that he was fleeing from the service of Adonai, for so he told them, they said to him, "What must we do to make the sea calm around us?" For the sea was growing more and more stormy. He answered, "Heave me overboard, and the sea will calm down for you, for I know that this terrible storm came upon you on my account." So Jonah knows. Jonah knows exactly what's going on, why this is happening. He's brought trouble to these people, these good people, these pagan people who are good people. They're just doing their job, working a cargo ship on the Mediterranean until Jonah comes on the boat. So he understands, God's after me and I can't run away from God. Just throw me overboard. Nevertheless, the crew rowed hard. They didn't want to throw Jonah overboard. They rowed hard to regain the shore, but they could not, for the sea was growing more and more stormy about them. Then they cried out to Adonai, "Oh, please, Adonai." So the pagans are crying out to God. Jonah hasn't cried out to God to save the boat. The pagans are crying out to Adonai. So Jonah says which God he's worshiping. And the pagan said, "Okay, we'll convert, and we're part of Adonai worship ourselves." So they freely worship Adonai. "Do not let us perish on account of this fellow's life. Do not hold us guilty of killing an innocent person. For you, O Adonai, by your will have brought this about." And they heaved Jonah overboard, and the sea stopped raging. Now, here's an interesting thing about this. There's Midrash on verse 15. Vayisu et Yonah, vayetiluhu el hayam. So literally that means they picked up Jonah and they threw him to the sea. Now, all the English says is they heaved Jonah overboard. Well, that's essentially what the Hebrew says. But because the Hebrew says that they picked him up and they threw him into the sea, the rabbis always like to find a way to learn a lesson from extraneous words in the Bible. So the story could have simply said they threw Jonah into the sea. Why did it say they picked him up and they threw him into the sea? So according to the Midrash, what it is they first picked up Jonah and put him into the water overboard just up to his ankles. And then the sea stopped raging. So then they picked him up, but then the sea started raging again. So they picked him up again, put him into the water, this time up to his waist. The sea stopped raging immediately. So then they picked him up and the sea started raging again. Then they put him into the water again, up to his neck. The sea stopped raging. And so they picked him up and the sea started raging again. Then they realized the only way to get it to stop raging is to keep Jonah in the water, and they threw him into the water. So the Midrash, taking the sailor's side here as how they are characters that they're not evil people. They're just tools in the story to talk about Jonah himself and how the sailors themselves are very willing and able to see God's action in the world around them. Jonah sees it, but wants to run away from it for whatever reason we don't know. We don't know until the end of the book why he doesn't want to accept the mission. So the crew feared Adonai greatly. They offered a sacrifice to Adonai, and they made vows. So what we're learning from chapter 1 then is for our sake, and especially for why it's here on Yom Kippur, is the willingness of other people, non-Jews, non-Israelites, to see the power of God, and sometimes how we are like Jonah, that either we don't see the power or we see the power and choose to run away from it and not to accept the obvious lessons that we can learn from the power of God. Right, so that's a good question, Steve. Did these sailors stay adherents of Adonai, or did they go back to their pagan worship? So I will at least say this: we have no idea. We don't see the sailors ever again in the story. All we can assume is that they just added worship of Adonai to their pagan repertoire. So in other words, it's just another, Adonai for them is just another god in their series of gods to pray to. So I wouldn't say that they then gave up the other gods. I think that at least they just added Adonai worship to their worship system. Okay, so let's look at Jonah's prayer in chapter 2. Adonai provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. We're at 369. And Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. And it doesn't say whale, it says big fish. So Jonah and the whale, it's what fish is big enough to swallow a human being? Well, I guess it could be a whale, and that's why people assume it's a whale. But in Hebrew, it's just dag gadol. There is a word in Hebrew in the Bible for a bigger fish like a whale, and that's leviathan, leviathan. So a leviathan is this mythic creature that is probably 50 times the size of the biggest whale that exists today. So there in the book of Job, there's a reference to Leviathan, and either Isaiah or Jeremiah has a reference to that as well, that there is little bits and pieces of this mythic idea of how God had to control these primordial beasts in order to create the world. So you have bits and pieces of that in the Bible itself. But Leviathan is known in Midrash today for why we eat gefilte fish. So they say in the Midrash, why do you eat gefilte fish on Shabbat? Because you're supposed to have a taste of the world to come. And in the world to come, everybody's going to eat this Leviathan. And what does that Leviathan, this fish, taste like? Well, it's gefilte fish. But then of course, it depends. Are you a Galicianer or a Litvak in terms of the recipe for gefilte fish? So imagine if you're a Galicianer and the recipe for gefilte fish up in heaven is the Litvak recipe. Oy, 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 what's going to be then? So but that's the idea. You take this midrash about Leviathan, that there's this mythic creature out there, and say that we're going to eat that in the world to come. And what is it? So, and we want to have a taste. Shabbat is supposed to be a taste of the world to come. So of course we want to eat some of the food that we might be eating in the world to come. So that's why we eat gefilte fish today. So Adonai provided a huge fish to swallow. I'm sorry to talk about food on Yom Kippur. And Jonah remained in the fish's belly 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah prayed to his God, Adonai, from the belly of the fish. And this is his prayer. And let's take a look at this prayer as we finish our time today. In my trouble, I called to Adonai, who answered me. From the belly of Sheol, I cried out, and you heard my voice. Now, did Jonah cry out? Jonah didn't cry out in chapter 1 at all. All he said, anything about God, is to the sailors, throw me into the water because I know God's angry at me for running away. Whatever he said back there to the sailors, right? He didn't call out to God to answer him. He ended up in the water, and for all we know, he wanted to die. First you talk about turkey, then gefilte fish, yes. No vegans or vegetarians in the world to come. That's right. We're all going to be pescatarians at least. Yes. And so the point here for this prayer is, in chapter 1, Jonah's not crying out to God. If anything, he's doing the opposite. He's denying anything to do with God anymore. So the poem that he prays to God is, in my trouble, I called to Adonai. And so Uriel Simon says, well, perhaps the past tense, really we should be understanding this as the future tense. And that in my trouble, I will call to Adonai, you will answer me. From the belly of Sheol, I will cry out, and you will hear my voice. That's a possibility. He points out other places in the Bible where the past tense can be understood for the future tense. Okay, you have to read the commentary to get into that. You cast me into the depths, into the heart of the sea. The floods engulfed me. All your breakers and billows swept over me. I thought I was driven away out of your sight. Would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? Again, Jonah's bringing something here in this prayer that we know nothing about. Did Jonah, son of Amittai of chapter 1, did he ever go to the temple? If it was in the northern kingdom of Israel, people in the northern kingdom of Israel, once the nation of Israel was split in two, the northern kingdom Israelites never went to Jerusalem. In fact, they were forbidden from going to Jerusalem. So if Jonah, son of Amittai, is from the northern kingdom, he's never been to the temple. Now, maybe he's wanted to see the temple, but he's never been there. So I thought would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? So implying that he's been there. So again, it's questionable language here in this poem, which also Uriel Simon says, is this part of the original book of Jonah, or is this something added to this book by a different author? So we don't know. The waters closed in over me, the deep engulfed me, weeds twined around my head. I sank to the base of the mountains, the bars of the earth closed upon me forever. Yet you brought my life up from the pit, O my God, Adonai. When my life was ebbing away, I called Adonai to mind, and my prayer came before you into your holy temple. They who cling to empty folly forsake their own welfare, but I, with loud thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will perform. Deliverance is Adonai's. Adonai commanded the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land. What I have vowed, I will perform. That is the connection to chapter 1. I realize I can't run away from you, essentially, is what this prayer is saying. You gave me a mission, and as a prophet, by definition, I need to fulfill my prophetic mission, and I will do so. And deliverance is Adonai's. Yeshuata l'Adonai. And then God commanded the fish, and it spewed Jonah out upon dry land. So, lessons of the book for Yom Kippur, and just one second. There was another question that somebody. Yeah, Leviathan appears in Psalm 104, right? Yes. Why did Jonah want to? So the question that. No, let me say it this way. We have to give a lot of credit to the rabbis for their choice of selections for Torah readings and Haftorah readings for all of the holidays. And it's clear for Yom Kippur morning why they chose that reading from the Torah, because clearly there's something in the Torah, chapter 16 of Leviticus, that describes the Yom Kippur ritual service. Okay, that makes sense. The choice for readings for Rosh Hashanah, that because Rosh Hashanah doesn't appear in the Torah in the form in which it is now, the rabbis had to be creative with that. So you wonder why they chose that, and I've spoken about that before. So Yom Kippur afternoon Torah reading is about chapter 18 from the book of Leviticus, sexual relationships that are forbidden. And that's usually explained as why it's chosen, why we're reading that on Yom Kippur afternoon, as opposed to the alternative reading that's in our Machzor, which is chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus, which is all about the holiness code, about how we are supposed to be holy to God, how we can be holy to God. Love your neighbor as you would be loved. And that makes more sense to us moderns as a Torah reading on Yom Kippur afternoon to talk about the bigger religious questions that Yom Kippur addresses, namely our relationship to God, how to be good people, how do we repent, how do we face our faults. We want to strive for holiness that chapter 19 of Leviticus teaches. So why Jonah for the Haftarah for Yom Kippur afternoon? And I think this gets to the great and like I said before, we give the rabbis a lot of credit for recognizing this, that not everybody that the rabbis were preaching to 1800 years ago not everybody was on their level of religiosity, that they had to be teaching the people about their version of Judaism and promoting that version of Judaism as something to strive for and live up to. And so the rabbis recognize that having a strong religious sense all the time is difficult, if not impossible. And perhaps by including a story of someone who runs away from the reality of God's presence, it could be a motivating factor and a powerful lesson to the average Israelite. That an average person who, the person that the rabbis are preaching to is a farmer who's working the land from dawn to dusk every single day, except for Shabbat, and working the land really hard without time for any leisure or relaxation. It's just work, work, work. And if things go well, you only hope that things go well. If things don't go well, then you lift up your arms and say, what am I supposed to do? I'm working as hard as I can, and yet I'm not seeing anything for it. I'm suffering. So the rabbis are preaching to people who are facing the realities of life and how difficult it is to be alive at their time, how difficult it is for us to be alive today, any day. And there's some days, of course, where things are going well, and it's easy to bless God, to thank God, to praise God for things that happen in life. But more often than not, we're kind of neutral about it because we're going about our business. But many times we're angry at God. Why is this virus here? Why am I sick? Why is my family member sick? Why am I going through this crisis? It's so much easier to just run away from this. Why do I need God in my life? Because this religion is only causing me problems. Because the religion is teaching me if I do good and I do right, then good will happen to me. And if I do bad, then bad will happen to me. So I'm doing good, but bad has happened to me. Why do I need the religion to bring evil to me? I'm just forget it all. I'm just going to run away. And that, I think, this essential religious angst that we all go through in life, and what Yom Kippur represents is what the book of Jonah teaches us. You can't run away from it. And it takes time, and it might even take desperate measures as being thrown overboard and swallowed by a fish to fully recognize there's no running away from God. Now, clearly it's in a machzor, it's in a prayer book. And what made Jonah a prophet, Sharon, is the rest of the book that we didn't finish, and that first, he had a relationship with God, whether it's an unusual relationship of running away, he still had access to God. That's number one. And number two, he told the people of Nineveh what to do, and it worked. So a prophet is supposed to foretell the future, and if the future comes true according to the prophet, then that's proof that that someone's a prophet. But it's more about the relationship to God and speaking, having an awareness of God's presence. That's what made him a prophet too, and that's what makes all the prophets prophets. So this isn't a religious text where the underlying principle is that God exists. For a non-religious person reading the book of Jonah, it's kind of hard to read the book of Jonah as an atheist, because clearly it's not meant for it could be meant to try to convince an atheist not to be an atheist, but it's the book of Jonah is all about perception. Why is this storm happening? Clearly, the sailors perceive that God had something to do with the storm. Whereas if you're not in the mindset to perceive God's presence, then you're not going to say that God caused the storm. You're going to say, oh, I should have checked the radar from AccuWeather before I set sail, and I would have seen that there's a storm brewing in the Mediterranean, and I wouldn't have gone that day. And if I get thrown overboard and just so happen that a fish swallows me up, to say that God brought the fish, yes, that could be a way of understanding that, or it could also be there just happened to be a fish there and saw dinner. So I'm not making light of it. I'm just saying that all religion is about perception, and if we are what all religions teach is that we should be in the mindset to perceive God's presence in everything and everywhere. And that's the point of being a religious person. That's the point of living a religious lifestyle, because then you see God everywhere around you. But you have to believe in order to perceive that. And if you don't believe it, then you won't perceive it. And that I think is one of the lessons of the book of Jonah. So again, what differentiates a major from a minor prophet is only the size of the book, how many chapters to the book. So the message of Jonah is just as powerful as the messages that Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel teach over and over again. It's just the longer books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel teach the lessons multiple times. Jonah, this is just a one lesson book, just 4 chapters. So the lesson is still powerful. There's just only one. So we'll end here for today. Usually there's no definitive ending and saying, oh yes, that's the be all and end all of the book of Jonah. It isn't. I also suggest that you read the 2-page introduction to Jonah that's on the side on 367 and 368. And again, when we gather again for Mincha in an hour and a half, we're not going to be reading from the Torah or from the Haftarah. So that could be something to read in this time before we gather again. So I wish everybody to continue to have an easy fast, a meaningful fast. I'll end the session now, and we'll gather again for Mincha at 5:30. So Gemar Tov.
Gemar Tov.